My husband's bank account is totally empty, haha. Be grateful for whatever little change you have left. Mom and my brother feel the same way, even though they didn't say it out loud. Everything happened just as my brother said it would. The whole family burst into laughter at Sale, who fell right into our trap. Let me introduce myself. My name is Emma. Last year, my brother Eric passed away. He had been in the hospital for 7 months before he peacefully passed away in his sleep one early morning. He was only 33. I am one of 3 siblings, Eric, me, and my younger brother Anders. Each of us is 2 years apart. Only Eric was married. Anders and I are still single. When Eric first brought his then-girlfriend Sophia home, I instantly disliked her. Initially, I was excited at the prospect of having a sister, since I only had brothers. But my first impression of her was the worst. "Nice to meet you," Sophia said, sitting next to Eric in the living room where the whole family had gathered. Smiling and looking cute, she was 5 years older than Eric and worked in the apparel industry. They apparently met through mutual friends. Honestly, I found Eric smitten look a bit too much, but it was his first girlfriend, so I figured it was understandable. While I was laughing at Eric, Sophia suddenly asked, "Is this house a rental?" What did she just say? I thought I misheard for a moment. Did she just ask if this house was a rental? Why would she ask that? While I was pondering this, Mom laughed and replied, "This house was built by our late dad. It's owned, not rented. Why do you ask?" So, I hadn't misheard. An indescribable feeling of discomfort began to spread inside me. That's good. I knew Dad had passed, but you're a single mother, right? I was wondering if you were poor, Sophia said. I felt angry. Indeed, single mothers often give the impression of struggling financially, but our family was not in financial distress thanks to Mom working hard and the substantial inheritance Dad left behind. Dad passed away in his 40s due to illness. At that time, Eric was in 10th grade, I was in 8th, and Anders was only in 6th. It must have been hard for Dad to leave Mom and his school-aged children behind, but he left us enough money for our education and this house. I felt like his intentions were being tarnished, and I instantly disliked her even more. Don't worry about weird stuff. Dad left us a fortune through insurance, and Mom is a department head at her company. All of us siblings are working, so we're financially stable, I said to Eric. Can't you see? She's making no sense. Doesn't it bother you? They say love is blind, but this is something else. But, once we're married, I become part of your family, right? If my husband's family is poor, that's true trouble for me. I don't want that, Sophia said. Wow, she's already thinking about marriage. I thought to myself. I guess that makes sense since she's been brought home and all, but as I might need to rethink my relationship with Eric. After Eric said he'd walk her home and they left, I told Mom and Anders. I couldn't stand her, Eric's wife. Absolutely not. What's up with that woman? Yeah, that's a bit much. Worrying about money already. Kind of off-putting, indeed. Not the most sensible thing to say, but when it comes to marriage, money matters are important, aren't they? If she's openly addressing her concerns instead of hiding them, well, that's somewhat endearing. Classic Mom. Always so level-headed. Even after such a rude comment, she finds it cute. Good. No wonder she's a successful sales director. Despite that first impression, I figured I'd just keep my distance and didn't strongly oppose Eric's marriage to her. A year after Eric brought Sophia home, they got married. From then on, I only saw her during summer vacations and Christmas. I didn't have much personal interaction with Sophia and managed to live my days without any particular discomfort. One day, Anders contacted me for advice. I had moved out when I started working and was living alone, while Anders, who had found a job within commuting distance from home, hadn't moved out yet. Anders told me that Sophia had reached out to him. She had said, How long are you going to parasite off your parents? You're an adult. You should move out and live on your own. I knew it was selfish, but I felt relieved when Anders said he'd commute from home. Mom had told us not to worry about it, but why would Sophia say such a thing to Anders? Eric and she had their own place, so Anders being at home shouldn't be an issue. I told him, don't worry about it. I was able to move out because you stayed. I'm grateful for that. Then, Anders shared a suspicion. Recently, Sophia had been visiting our house often. Mostly, she talks with Mom. She comes alone, has dinner that Mom made, gets Eric's portion packed in a container, and leaves. Can you believe it? The other day, after I came out of the shower, I overheard her talking with Mom in the living room. She said, "It'll be lonely for you to live here alone if I move out. How about we live together?" Maybe she's after this house. I couldn't believe what was happening. I spoke with Mom on the phone the other day, but she didn't mention anything about Sophia. Maybe she didn't want to worry me. This gives me a bad feeling. After hanging up, I immediately called Eric. I asked him to meet because there was something I wanted to discuss. When I mentioned I wanted to talk about Sophia, Eric seemed to have some concerns of his own and agreed to meet right away after work. I headed to the pub Eric had picked. He was already there, having a beer. Eric, who I hadn't seen since last Christmas, seemed to have lost weight. It's been half a year since our last meeting. As I took a seat and ordered a beer, I asked Eric straight out, "Eric, are things okay with Sophia? Do you guys talk? I heard she's been visiting home a lot. Do you know about that?" Eric gave a wry smile and said, "You know too. Emma, I'm aware she's been visiting Mom frequently, but she doesn't mention these visits when she's at our place. So how do you know? The dinner table is filled with Mom's cooking. You can't get that taste unless she's getting lessons or bringing food home for Mom's, right? Makes sense." Eric would recognize the taste of Mom's cooking. "Don't you talk to Sophia about it? Normally, you'd mention it if you visited your spouse's family, right? I've never heard her mention it. Do you know that Sophia has suggested living with Mom?" I didn't know that. Eric seemed off. He furrowed his brow and seemed deep in thought before suddenly saying to me, "She spends money like water, huh?" Spends money like water? Well, from Sophia's appearance, it's clear she spends a lot on fashion. I only see her twice a year, but she always shows up in famous brand clothes, accessories, bags, and shoes. As far as I know, Sophia is a housewife, and Eric is an average salaryman, so I didn't think they could afford such luxuries. I assumed they were saving elsewhere, especially since they don't have children. "I'm thinking about divorcing her," Eric said. "She took out loans without telling me, in my name, $100 from various credit companies and consumer finance firms. I found out when collection letters started arriving at the house. That's not all. She's been dipping into our savings too. Our account's at zero. It's laughable." Eric laughed with sad eyes, but I couldn't find it funny at all. Sophia is indeed unreasonable and untrustworthy. My first impression wasn't wrong. Maybe I should have opposed their marriage more strongly, but seeing Eric in such pain, I couldn't say anything. According to Eric, Sophia probably wanted to move in with Mom to free up the rent money for her own use. Indeed, owning the family home means no rent to pay. The entire amount they're currently paying for rent would be saved. Plus, if Sophia could get Mom to cover utilities and groceries, she'd have even more disposable income. And apparently, she can't do any housework. Wait a minute, isn't she a housewife? Not working, not managing the house. Sophia was just a leech on Eric's salary. That day, we had a moderate drink and called it a night. Eric said he'd get in touch if the divorce went through and waved goodbye. However, the next time Eric contacted me, it wasn't about a divorce. Eric had cancer. Advanced stage. I couldn't believe it until Eric, thinner than when I last saw him, came to our family home with his diagnosis. He handed us hospital admission papers needing the family's signature. We stood in front of Eric, crying. The same dreadful disease that took Dad was now claiming Eric. Of all things to inherit. Mom said to Dad's photo, "Why this soon?" After Eric was hospitalized, the doctors gave him 3 months to live. It was hospice care after he was admitted. Sophia was nowhere to be seen. Nearly 3 months had passed since his admission. The time the doctors gave him was almost up, yet Eric was still fighting. We visited him every week. Gradually, he lost his ability to do things, and after 5 months, he couldn't even get out of bed. During this time, Sophia never visited once. The nurses confirmed it. Besides us, no one visited Eric. The hospital only allowed family visits, and the only family apart from us was Sophia. Despite everything, the divorce never happened, and it seemed Eric would pass without it being finalized. Initially, I had strongly suggested Eric divorce, but after hearing his thoughts, I stopped. 6 months after his hospitalization, Eric passed away. We brought his body back to our family home. Eric must have been happy to be home after so long. Mom had apparently contacted Sophia. As we were discussing with the funeral director, Sophia showed up. I blurted out, "Get out." But on paper, Eric and Sophia were still married. She retorted that she had the right to see him off, and I couldn't argue. Afterward, we, along with Eric, moved to the funeral home arranged by the funeral director. There, we held the wake and the funeral, notifying Eric's friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. Preparing for the funeral, it was all so busy. There was no time to mourn, but that helped us forget the pain of losing Eric. For Mom, losing both her beloved husband and son to the same disease was unimaginably painful, but she remained composed as the organizer till the end. Anders and I, overwhelmed by grief, often broke down in tears, causing much worry around us. After the funeral was over, Sophia appeared before us again. Despite her claims of having the right to see him off, she attended neither the wake nor the funeral. Where had she been? Well, her absence was a relief for us. Her attire was flashy, branded clothing, not mourning wear. What had she come for? Sophia approached us and blurted out, "Was there any fundraising or financial assistance? How much was raised?" I was instantly seething with anger. She came to snatch the money collected at Eric's funeral. "Are you here for the donations? Leave now and never show your face here again." "What are you talking about?" "The donations collected for my husband's funeral belong to me, his wife." "Hand them over quickly," she demanded. "There's no money for you. Get out." Anders and I were shaking with rage as we yelled, "After all, you never once visited Eric in the hospital. What kind of wife are you?" "But we're not divorced, so I'm obviously his wife," Sophia smirked. Then, she heard Mom say calmly, "There were no donations or financial assistance. Everything went to the funeral expenses. We're actually short by about $1,000. As his wife, will you be covering that? That's for you to pay. Besides, he didn't have much money, did he? His bank account only had $4,000. Saying that, she pulled out a card from her branded bag. It was Eric's banking card. That card should have been among Eric's belongings we brought back from the hospice with the funeral preparations. His belongings were left in the living room. Did she just take it without permission? I went to the bank and withdrew it all, only bills from the ATM, no coins. "Here, take the change," she said, slamming Eric's banking card and a paper statement onto the table. Pulling it closer, I saw that indeed $4,000 was withdrawn, leaving just a few dollars. Tears of frustration and sadness overflowed. "Get out, just get out," I exclaimed. Then Mom said to Sophia, "That money belonged to my son. You shouldn't have withdrawn it without permission. I'm his wife. I have the right to inherit his estate," Sophia countered. "Well, I'm his mom. I have inheritance rights too. You want to split just $4,000? Mom questioned. Yes, the account only had $4,000. That's his estate. You can have it. In return, we want nothing to do with you from now on. Agreed. Mom stated firmly. She then grabbed Sophia's arm, dragged her to the door, and locked it after pushing her out. For a while, we just looked at each other, then, unable to hold back, burst into laughter. Actually, we had anticipated Sophia might steal the banking card and left it in Eric's belongings on purpose. This was all Eric's plan. After being hospitalized, while he still could, he quietly set his affairs in order. He changed the insurance beneficiary to Mom and transferred his share of Dad's inheritance to Anders and me. All these were measures to prevent anything from going to Sophia. Eric wanted to divorce Sophia, but devised a plan when he learned of his limited time. A plan to make Sophia pay off the debts that she had accumulated. She should pay what she owed. Being a housewife with no credit, Sophia couldn't borrow money, so she had been using Eric's name to take out loans. After Eric decided to divorce, he planned to take legal action to transfer the debts to Sophia. But then his illness was discovered. Legal proceedings take time, and his life would likely end before the court's decision. So Eric deliberately chose not to divorce to leave Sophia with the debts. Inheritance is not just about receiving assets. It also includes liabilities. Eric had a debt of $100,000, all created by Sophia. He planned to make her inherit it. For this purpose, Eric prepared a banking card with only $4,000. Having relinquished everything else, Eric's estate consisted of the $4,000 in the account and the $100,000 debt. Upon his passing, Sophia would undoubtedly try to get her hands on the banking card, so he intentionally left it easily accessible in the bag. Sure enough, Sophia would withdraw the cash swiftly and spend it just as quickly. The account was essentially bait, and Sophia, not well-versed in law, would likely leave things as they were. Meanwhile, we would complete the renunciation of inheritance. Thus, all of Eric's estate would belong to Sophia. Eric repeatedly instructed us on this plan, ensuring its execution through his will. Afterward, we completed the renunciation of inheritance. Eric's will was fully executed in 3 months. All of Eric's estate would legally be Sophia's. 6 months passed uneventfully. Photos of Eric and Dad were lined up at the family home. One day, while visiting home and praying before their pictures, the doorbell rang. It was Sophia. "Can we talk? I have something to say," she said. I didn't respond and turned off the doorbell. Then, loud banging at the door began. "Open up," she demanded. I said I want to talk. "Open the door now." Amidst the banging, a heavier thud was heard, and Mom went to open the door. Sophia barged in forcefully. "Hey, you have money, right? Phil's assets, inheritance, hand over Eric's share," she demanded. She seemed to have realized the inheritance she had received, the existence of the negative inheritance. "There's no such thing. You used up Eric's savings, didn't you? The only thing left was that $4,000, Mom retorted. "Lies. Then give me this house." Eric was the eldest son, wasn't he? Shouldn't the eldest son inherit Dad's estate? Then, as his wife, I should inherit this house. This house is mine. The house is in my name. I inherited it from my husband. The children were still students at the time, so you have no right to inherit it. Why didn't the eldest son inherit anything? You people are crazy. Just give me whatever Eric was supposed to inherit. I've said it multiple times. There's nothing left. Please leave now, Mom insisted.
No.
This house is mine. I won't leave. With that, she began forcefully throwing things around in the entryway. Mom and I quickly ran out, and the neighbor, who must have heard the commotion, came to see what was happening. We asked him to call the police. Soon, a patrol car arrived with sirens blaring, and sturdy police officers stepped out. After we explained the situation, the officers went inside and emerged shortly after, escorting Sophia, who was screaming and shouting. Her tirade worsened when she saw us, but as the officers pushed her into the patrol car, she was taken away. Later, we heard that Sophia was severely reprimanded at the police station and signed an agreement never to approach us again. It's almost a year since Eric passed away. Perhaps Dad and Eric are now peacefully having a drink together. Dad always dreamed of drinking with his son. Looking up at the clear sky, I was suddenly reminded of Dad and Eric's smiling faces. You're just a wife, and I'm the precious daughter of this house. Wives are like housekeepers, right? You should just keep quiet and do as I say. Got it? Now, get to work for me. Linnea fumed. I calmly responded to Linnea's rant. I don't live in this house, you know? Huh. I'm Alice, 23 years old. I had just married my husband Gustav, who's the same age, 6 months ago. We lived together at my in-laws' house. My in-laws are reasonable and calm people. We've had a good relationship since we started dating. It was meant to be a temporary arrangement until our new home under construction was finished, but my in-laws warmly welcomed us once we got married. There was no sudden change in their attitude towards me. We lived together, respecting each other, surrounded by my loving husband and kind in-laws. My married life seemed smooth sailing, but there was one thing that concerned me. That was Linnea, my husband's younger sister, by a year. She disliked me from the first meeting. She'd say things like, "You look so unfashionable. Where did you buy those weird clothes? You have no sense of style," as she would spitefully speak and despise me. She's currently living with her boyfriend, but it seems things aren't going too well, and she frequently returns home. Whenever Linnea comes back, she treats me, her sister-in-law, almost like a housekeeper, bossing me around with various chores. My husband and in-laws would always scold her, but she never seemed to change her ways. One day, while I was doing chores with my sister Astrid and taking a break with some coffee, we heard a noise from the entrance. I'm home. It seemed like Linnea had returned. As I stood up with a bit of a heavy heart to make coffee, Linnea said, "Alice, I want something sweet," she said repeatedly. I took out some cookies from the kitchen cupboard and served them with coffee to Linnea, but she complained, "Ugh, not this. Don't you have anything else? You really have no taste." I was in the mood for jasmine tea, but I guess I'll have to make do with this. I'm sorry. Inside, I was irritated, but I thought it pointless to argue, so I held it in, watching the scene. Astrid began to scold Linnea. "Linnea, what on earth are you saying to Alice? How is she supposed to know what you're feeling? Alice is Gustav's wife, not your servant. And you've been coming back here almost every day, but have you properly talked things out with Stephen?" Linnea, like a petulant child, covered her ears, clearly not wanting to hear another word. Stephen is Linnea's boyfriend, a genuinely nice and refreshing guy. In the early days of their relationship, they were so affectionate it was almost embarrassing to watch, and it seemed like they might even get married. However, after a few months of living together, they started having serious issues. Linnea didn't do any housework and was reckless with money. On top of that, her infidelity came to light, leading Stephen to finally suggest breaking up. The apartment they lived in was rented under Stephen's name, and he apparently wanted her out as soon as possible. Despite this, Linnea stubbornly refused to leave and had been dodging any discussions about it. I was utterly astounded by Linnea's behavior, but chose to stay silent and let it pass. Even if I offered advice, I doubted she would listen. Astrid, addressing Linnea, said, "Think about Stephen's feelings, not just your own. If you've done something wrong, you should apologize first." She spoke as if gently admonishing a small child, but Linnea was just defiant and didn't seem to take it to heart. By the time Linnea left, Astrid was completely exhausted. "Astrid, I'll take care of things from here. Please rest a bit. When I said this, Astrid gave a weary smile. Thank you, Alice. I think I will rest for a bit. Astrid seemed quite worn out because of Linnea. I wanted to be of some help to Astrid. The next day was a holiday, so we had a late breakfast and were relaxing while enjoying some light conversation. The doorbell rang. Who could that be? I'll go check. I stood up to check the monitor and saw Stephen standing there. Stephen's here. When I informed everyone, my father-in-law looked a bit stern. Stephen, huh? It's been a while. Let him in. I went to the door and invited Stephen into the living room. When Stephen and I entered the living room, my in-laws bowed deeply, clearly feeling very sorry, and apologized to him. Stephen, it's been a while. We are truly sorry for what our foolish daughter has put you through. It must be our fault for how we raised her. She's an adult but can't differentiate between right and wrong. Seeing my in-laws bow their heads over Linnea's behavior made my heart ache. My husband seemed to feel the same, his face crinkled with concern. Then Stephen, looking troubled, spoke up. Hello everyone, it's been a while. Please raise your heads. It's not the parents' fault. I came today because I have something I need to discuss with you. We'll do anything we can. Please don't hesitate to ask, Astrid said eagerly. Stephen continued, Thank you. I'm sorry to have to say this, but I need your help convincing Linnea to leave the apartment as soon as possible. I trusted her and allowed us to live together, and I'm deeply sorry it's come to this. With that, Stephen deeply apologized to my in-laws. He looked worn out, perhaps from lack of sleep, and his face was pale. Seeing him like this, Victor nodded firmly and said, You don't even have to ask. We'll make sure Linnea understands. She's been a nuisance. Astrid added, Yes, Stephen, we're so sorry. After hearing my in-laws' response, Stephen seemed a bit relieved and gave a weak smile. After Stephen left, my in-laws discussed what to do about Linnea. They decided to call Linnea and try to persuade her, so my husband and I told them we'd be upstairs in our room if they needed us. 30 minutes later, Linnea arrived, and from the living room downstairs, we could hear voices growing louder, occasionally interrupted by the sound of something breaking, Astrid's scream, and Linnea's furious shouting. My husband and I exchanged looks, trying to decide when to go downstairs to help when we heard Astrid's voice calling us, Gustav, Alice, could you come down here, please? Yes, we're coming, I replied, and immediately rushed downstairs with my husband. In the living room, we found an enraged Linnea, a stern-faced Victor, and a worn-out Astrid. The TV remote in Linnea's bag was scattered on the floor, and the glass doors of the sideboard were shattered. I was stunned by the mess, but my husband calmly asked Astrid, Mom, are you okay? Astrid, looking tired, answered with a smile, Yes, I'm sorry to worry you. Then Victor, exchanging a glance with Astrid, declared, Gustav and Alice, we want you to hear this. Until Linnea reflects on her actions and genuinely changes, she is not welcome in our house. So if she tries to enter while we're away, don't hesitate to turn her away. Understood, Dad? My husband nodded quietly. Then Astrid continued, We've decided not to indulge Linnea any further. She has such a wonderful boyfriend, yet she chooses to live selfishly and even cheat. It's unbelievable. You will have to work and pay back the money you've spent frivolously, Alice. Please help us with this. Yes, understood, I replied. Linnea glared at me, then with a huff of displeasure, she said, I'm done with this place. I won't come back ever again. You'll regret ignoring your own daughter, but don't come crying to me later. With those parting words, she stormed out of the living room. I noticed Linnea had left her bag on the floor, so I hurried after her to hand it over. She snatched it roughly. Mom and Dad said what they said, but if you dare stop me from entering this house just because you're the wife, you'll regret it, she threatened me in a menacing tone. I hesitated for a moment and stepped back, prompting Astrid, who looked concerned, to approach. "Hey, you didn't say anything rude to Alice, did you?" Linnea replied nonchalantly, "Anymore, you know. I'm Alice, 23 years old, and I had just married my husband Gustav 6 months ago. We lived together at my in-laws' house, where Linnea, my husband's younger sister, often made things a bit tense. Whenever Linnea returned home, she treated me almost like a housekeeper, bossing me around with various chores. One day, when Linnea came back, she demanded things in a rather rude manner, leaving me feeling irritated but choosing to stay silent. Later, Stephen, Linnea's boyfriend, arrived, looking troubled. He apologized deeply for the situation, but also requested help in convincing Linnea to leave their shared apartment due to their relationship issues. My in-laws readily agreed, and after a tumultuous encounter with Linnea, she left the house, agreeing to move out of Stephen's apartment. 3 months later, our lives started to regain some peace, with Linnea seemingly gone. However, one day, she returned unannounced, demanding chores and asserting her status as the daughter of the house. Despite my attempts to reason with her, she refused to leave, insisting that I, as the wife, should obey her commands. But I calmly reminded her that I no longer lived in that house. It's like a scene straight out of a family drama, isn't it? Linnea's return certainly stirred up quite a bit of chaos. But amidst all the commotion, it's heartwarming to see how your family handled the situation with grace and firmness. Despite Linnea's attempts to disrupt the peace, your family stayed united and resolute in their decisions. It's sad to see how Linnea's choices led her down a path of loneliness and hardship. It's a stark reminder of the consequences of our actions, especially when driven by selfishness and disregard for others. On a brighter note, your family's new chapter in the countryside sounds like a wonderful adventure. And the bond you share, evident in those video calls with the in-laws, is truly precious. It's these simple moments of connection and love that make life truly meaningful, isn't it?